I would now like to introduce today's presenters. Abhishek Singh, Vice President, co-leads the IT Services Research Team and assists clients globally on topics related to digital and technology services. Kumar Avijit, Practice Director, leads the Everest Group's Cloud and Infrastructure practice and assists clients on topics related to cloud, infrastructure, network, and security services. And with all of that, I would now like to turn things over to Abhishek. Take it away.
Thank you, David. So, hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on which part of the globe you're joining from. And since the topic today is on work from home, or as I would like to say, work from anywhere, it's interesting that most of us would probably be, depending on the situation that we are in, would be joining on from our home or home offices, as we like to call it. So the question for the agenda for the day. Here are the things that we'll cover today that you see in front of your slides. So first one is looking at state of the digital workplace services market, which is basically the story so far when it comes to how organizations, corporations are starting to or have gone down the path of dealing with their workplace management, their remote work, and in general, their workplace strategy. Then we'll move from the story so far to something which is around, hey, as organizations think of realigning to the new normal, how they see their workplace transforming from age-old brick and mortar centralized models to more federated, more distributed models wherein employees, colleagues will have greater flexibility of working from wherever they choose from, how the organizations will start thinking about it, reimagining their own workplace. That's the topic that we'll touch upon. And then finally, we'll get into a bit of Q&A after we have presented a good bit of content. So that's the agenda for the day. Before we dove into the content, wanted to get a sense check of what has been the result of what we have done in the past year or so. So what you see in front of you is a quick poll question around what has been the impact of 1 year of remote work as you have seen that work out for you. So as I'm looking at it, there is a kind of an intense race happening between productivity increase and no change, productivity decline kind of following. So let's give it a few seconds to share the final results. It's still interesting. Seems like we have a winner here by far, but I'll wait till the end of the polling. Okay, all right. So as you can see, most of the participants, at least on this call, believe that productivity increased while they work from remote locations, work from home, work from distributed locations. And I think that's a good cue for us to jump into the discussion that we are having today, which is around the aspect of remote digital workplace. Now, even before we jump into the topic of the broader concept of digital workplace, let's spend some time reflecting upon how the year has gone by, the year that has just gone by, and the impact of COVID on the digital workplace and what have been the major themes that have defined the impact of COVID on digital workplace. So you see 4 aspects get mentioned here. One is this whole aspect of workplace reimagination, which used to sit under maybe the human resources or the IT side of the house in terms of determining and designing how organizations would think of either their workplace strategy or workplace design. Right now, what we are seeing on the left-hand side, if you take a look at the chart, at the slide, workplace reimagination has pivoted to become one of the top C-suite priorities. Yes, organization leaders, boards are seriously thinking about how to make their workplace more flexible, more agile, ensuring that wherever their employees are, they could get the same kind of seamless, secure access that would allow them to showcase productivity, higher productivity actually, while they work from any location of their choice. And in many ways, when we are talking about workplace reimagination, a key underlying theme is the aspect of choice. Because uh, while we pivot too much to this question of work from home, there are folks within any organization who would still want to visit an office location in certain situations, which requires a good bit of tag teaming, whiteboarding, so on and so forth, which may not have achieved the right kind of optimal status trying to do it over virtual tools such as Teams, Zoom, and other such tools that we have been using. So this aspect of choice is going to be very important as organizations continue to think about how the pandemic induced nudge towards working from anywhere is taking them towards a direction of a distributed workplace model wherein an office location as well as distributed locations, including home, become part and parcel of how an organization gets designed. And that is why, if you look at the third point mentioned here, aspects such as VDI, cloud, gig economy will continue to drive the thought process of how organizations think about their workplace design and also how they would go about in the next 5 years or so, thinking about their whole organizational strategy. Now, the last point is important, and I already touched upon it. It's important from the perspective of understanding the debate around the distributed model. Right now, we are calling it work from home because most of us sitting in this room attending this webinar are probably accessing it from our home offices. But over a period of time, we need to understand that this work from home model, the H of the WFH, has to change to A as in anywhere, depending on the flexibility that any individual would need to work. Wherever they feel they can generate maximum productivity, wherever they believe they can get the best out of their work-life balance, all the time ensuring that their mental well-being, their behavioral health aspects aligned with the higher productivity needs of the organizations are both taken care of. And that is why personally, I would want to get rid of this WFH and transition to a WFA, which is the work from anywhere model. But it'll be still some time before organizations really start using that term, but definitely would want all of us, at least in this room, to start using that term more often. So while we have discussed the topic of the impact of COVID on digital workplace and what its implications are going to be, let's look at what's the size of the prize in terms of just the basic workplace organization, how they look at different aspects of workplace and how it is panning out. And my colleague Avijit, and he and I have been discussing and debating a lot of these tenets that you see mentioned here, have been discussing this. So I'll kind of punt it over to Avijit to take us through some of these tenets.
Thank you, Abhishek. Interestingly, digital workplace market is a $89 billion workplace market from a market size perspective. It's growing at an average of 3 to 5%. Let me bring to some finer nuances here. What has shifted in this particular pandemic? Traditionally, workplace services or end user services, as we call it, it's been looked upon more as a cost function. However, the pandemic has transitioned this to be a experience driven function, with millennials coming in, work from home or work from anywhere being the new normal. Employee morale, employee brand they work for are becoming important. Hence, the experience aspect is driving this particular segment. If you initially see how work from home also evolved, the adoption initially with end users was positive. Then it dipped due to various challenges such as work-life balances. People missed going to offices. They missed, being in close proximity of their colleagues. However, the user experience bit then gradually embraced, and users took this new normal, and this particular user experience changes for a user from a location as well as a time perspective, where end users have different reactions based on their location or time of services. If I look at the various market segments, and let me pick a couple of examples out here and how they are evolving, from a desk side support uh, perspective, we see that, enterprises area in this particular segment is more towards, self-service and providing uh, self-healing devices. Secondly, if you look the infrastructure apps, then the focus is on personalization and follow me apps. And if I talk about mobility, the enterprises are talking about providing support which is agnostic of the device or the operating system. Similarly, in the area of asset management, it's more about the persona driven based on your job role in the organization. Let me take an example and say that, if you are a sales individual, you'll have a different hardware requirement as compared to a designer in the organization or a R&D specialist in the organization who would have a different device requirement. Couple of challenges which emerge as a common theme across the segment, and I would say overall from a workplace services construct perspective, is that there's lack of standardization and lack of knowledge management, which is helping out, which are being pointed out by enterprises as key focus areas. However, user experience, is the key focus which enterprises are driving within their workplace services construct. Moving to the next slide, if I look at the geographic view of things, I see North America market being the biggest of them all. Predominantly workplace services are driven in North America, Europe, and United Kingdom, which has the lion's share. In the North American market, it is more focused on verticalizations of my solutions. As you think of user experience, you will be thinking that who's the employee and what is his job role in that particular industry. So the workplace services solution needs to be contextualized as per his industry needs and as per the employee needs within that organization. When I talk about Europe and UK together, that these geographies have a greater focus on employee engagement and experience. However, there are traditional nuances of data security, compliances, which are key themes, demand themes emerging here. From an APAC perspective, which is another key segment here, there is stronger focus of enterprises on driving employee productivity, and hence there is a greater emphasis on having the right collaboration tools and having simplified cost takeout as a solution. Abhishek, why don't you take the industry view and try to understand the industry, help us understand the industry implications for workplace transformation.
Thank you, Abhijit. I know, since when you were talking through the geographic view and also the thematic view of end user computing and workplace services, one thing that was clearly coming out is that, hey, there is no cookie cutter approach to workplace design. It has to be very, very context driven, whether we are talking about where we are operating from. So the geo perspective becomes important, and also in which industry or business we are operating from, which this slide in front of you showcases. Because at the end of the day, depending on which industry or geo and the slice and dice of both you're operating in, ends up determining what kind of workplace end user computing needs that you would end up having. And now what you see on this slide is basically a market size distribution of spend on workplace services. So obviously no prizes for guessing that the BFSI, manufacturing, public sector, etc., comprise a lion's share of the industry's spending on workplace services. But the nuance is important to understand here as to what these industries specifically are focusing on. So take something like BFSI, where there is a greater focus these days on asset and data protection, given the financial risk of working from in a remote or a federated model is concerned. And we have heard some recent concerns also about, hey, is a work from home or a distributed workforce model really safe for an industry which is working with financial data, protected information, so on and so forth. So while the industry kind of tries to navigate through some of these concerns and questions, what is amply clear is that depending on which geo you operate in, which industry you operate in, you're still trying to figure out or find out a middle ground using which you can, from the extremities of everybody working from home to the other extreme of everybody coming into large centralized office locations, you have to find something somewhere in between which allows enough flexibility for the workforce to continue working and ensuring that some of the concerns around financial operational risks are taken care of, and not only taken care of, mitigated. Similarly, when we look at manufacturing, the focus on IoT in workplace use cases as smart manufacturing, digital twinning, etc., aspects get discussed, how that will happen from a perspective of distributed workforce, how public sector continues to think about confidential data security, retail thinks about in-store experience transformation, at the same time thinking of e-commerce as a viable option in a situation wherein not a lot of brick and mortar stores can welcome the same level of population, at least in the countries which still are going through lockdowns. And hence, the key point here being that, repeating myself, there cannot be a cookie cutter approach to workplace, and that is what we have seen so far. But what is amply clear is that all industries, all geographies where they operate in are thinking of some ways to find an equilibrium in terms of how they can navigate between office-based work models to remote work models. And this is what we wanted to cover from the perspective of the story so far. And that is why we will now pivot to what is going to happen based on what we have seen so far. So if we could move to the next slide. The next topic that we will cover here is this whole aspect of reimagining the digital workplace for the new normal. And this question always pops up because, which is, hey, what do we really mean by the new normal? Because at the end of the day, what we are trying to see for ourselves is that after what we have seen as the impact of COVID on digital workplace, any sort of a normal that we will come to is not going to be the same that we saw pre 2020 or 2019 and in the past. Hence, it is going to be something new, but we need to understand what are the aspects of the impact of COVID which is causing us to think of it differently. So Abhijit, what do you think is really happening in terms of how organizations have started to think differently about digital workplace?
I think a major change which is happening is in terms of at the start of the year, we saw enterprise quickly shifting to the work from home model. As a result of the pandemic, there was a significant focus on get your work from home model up and running. So this led to a lot of transformation taking place at an organization level. We hear of organization trying to unearth 2 years of digital transformation in 2 weeks time frame. Be it enterprises from oil and gas sector or manufacturing sector, everyone wanted to get up and running and set up their work from home model. This drastically reduced your transformation timeline within the enterprise landscape. So we see 90% contraction in transformation timelines for organizations. Similarly, we see a lot of scope revision which is happening through organization looking to realign how workplace services are delivered. Traditionally, the way end user support is provided on desk side support saw some changes happening, which is it is being remote desk side support where you are using more self-healing technology rather than the users themselves walking up to the organization IT hubs and trying to resolve their queries. Further, it significantly reduced deal closure cycle time, as as Abhishek mentioned, all these digital transformation mandates with respect to workplace services became a C-suite agenda and became a talking point from at the boardroom level. We saw a lot of organizations trying to, get their transformation agenda started real quick. Abhishek, how do you see this impacting the global service delivery model? What sort of changes are you are seeing in the market?
Absolutely. And if you could move to the next slide and taking cue from what you were just talking about, Abhijit. In our work with enterprises, we have tried to build a framework in terms of how to help them think through their own remote work strategy or a work from home model. Now, it's the changes that are happening from a remote work or a work from home model cannot happen overnight. And there is obviously a baby step approach or a journey based approach that organizations need to take based on two key parameters. So if you look at this chart in front of you, and I know it's a pretty busy slide with a lot of dots and text, but for a moment, just fixate yourself on the legends of the two axes that you see on this 2x2. So when we work with organizations, we try to nudge them to think about with their different service delivery buckets from the perspective of one, what you see on the x-axis, which is the feasibility aspect, which is the ease of remote delivery, which basically means, hey, what is the degree of collaboration needed? What is the extent of process standardization that is going to be required? What is the technology infrastructure needs? Do we really need to kind of invest in a lot of storage, cloud access, network access, all of that? And last but not the least, location proximity needs. So as long as some of these aspects allow you to think of easing up the requirements or the constraints around allowing your workforce to work from a distributed location, it becomes easier for you to kind of think of the feasibility aspect. Now, the feasibility aspect is not the only aspect, but because when we try to correlate it with the risk associated with remote delivery that you see on the y-axis, so whether it's information and data security needs associated with any service delivery model, any delivery location specific risk that we are aware of or the organization is aware of, and last but not the least, any risk and control requirements that you might have. Now, the question is, when we try and distribute all of these, and what you see in front of you, again, is a generalized assessment of the different buckets of service delivery that we have seen. So say something like contact center, or talking about testing and validation, HR training, L&D, app development. These are some of the areas, whether these are IT services or business process services elements. We have seen that both from a feasibility perspective as well as the acceptance of risk, these happen to be areas wherein these are happen to be in the area of zone of acceptance or sweet spot. And that is where actually we have seen organizations pivot strongly towards the work from home model. But then there are others, such as marketing services. Within healthcare, we have seen specific operations, banking, on-site break fix, which by the way was on the bottom left-hand side, wherein we haven't really seen organizations think of work from home or remote work as a feasible model there. And hence, why this chart is important, it does not give you a comprehensive and a complete picture of all the components that you look at, but gives you two things. One, from a generic set of service buckets that you look at, you can easily look at this chart and correlate with how your workplace strategy has transformed. So are you pivoting too far down the remote work model in an area which is a high risk or a low feasibility area? Or are you holding back yourself from kind of freeing up that service model from the benefits of productivity that remote work can give you by not adopting it to the extent that you see the broader industry adopting it? Hence, in many ways, this chart kind of gives you a view of how this model is progressing. Moving on to the next slide. See, at the end of the day, as you looked at the previous chart and looked at the different components of the service buckets and how they should transition to work from anywhere or work from home, the key aspects to understand is as you think of those buckets, internally to get approvals for that, you have to build a good business case for it. And we have seen organizations as they think about those service buckets that we showcased on the last slide and think about building a business case around it. Some of the most common elements of the business case in favor of work from anywhere happen to be the ones that you see in front of you, right? So these could be significant cost savings, improved talent models by way of accessing talent from anywhere, any location, etc., which allows them to have greater flexibility in terms of hiring, onboarding, and ensuring that they have enough bench on their staff to take care of upcoming opportunities. The third aspect is the business continuity planning and resiliency, which can have both aspects, whether it's a high risk or a low risk model. But this is one of the very important elements for you to be thinking about whether or not you would want to transition to a remote work model. And then last two, which are now becoming more important than ever before, is the improved delivery model flexibility, which allows you to showcase internally how you would want to bring about greater agility in your operating model, because as enterprises, you are also trying to bring about certain changes in your operating model, in your go-to-market, leveraging the digital channels. You are showcasing more and more flexibility and agility in launching new products. And hence, you would want that to trickle down to your workforce also, that flexibility, that agility. And that remote work model kind of allows you to kind of drive that strong connotation of agility. And last but not the least is the whole aspect of the societal and environmental benefits that go along with it. When you are letting go of the huge carbon generating brick and mortar offices and are moving to a more distributed models wherein you are able to kind of circumvent some of those issues associated with centralized office workspaces. Moving to the cloud has its own benefit, by the way, in terms of how you would have seen the public cloud players talk about the environmental benefits. So all of these go hand in hand as you think about how you think of your own work from home strategies. Now, the question is, beyond these 5 tenets that we see, how do you think of some of the elements or metrics that should allow you to build a closer business case? And that is where I'll ask Abhijit to kind of share some thoughts on, hey, what are the components or metrics that are going to be really important from the perspective of building that out?
Sure. Thank you, Abhishek. Again, let me just take a step back and see what actually happened. What we see is that when organizations moved to delivering work from home, this particular workplace services model, which became highly remote centric, but the internal design elements of this particular model were not tuned to new ways of working. They were still based on our old ways of working, where we used to be in offices, we used to collaborate together in meeting rooms, have discussions freely. And again, as the work from home drive began, and employees saw a higher burnout rate happening after a few months. And one possible reason we identify is that they're not able to collaborate that well as they were able to collaborate in their earlier ways of working. So similarly, at an enterprise level, there are concerns emerging from data security, from privacy, and a higher compliance-related concerns. Thus, we see that 75% of the enterprises are reviewing their current workplace model for a more flexible option. And I would like to highlight that what should the goal of this new workplace model should be. It is not about getting people operationalized in a work environment right now, giving them a laptop, having them remotely connect to the system. It's also about building the right culture and working and and right collaboration culture, right, having the right connectivity with people to drive employee engagement. And this is specifically more important for people who have joined remotely in this current setup, and this has been a long journey for a lot of us. Uh, and for those particular, remote employees, it's essential they feel they are part of the organization. They are part of the organizational fabric. To foster these uh, organizational culture and values, enterprises are seeking the right set of tools and technologies, which include, video conferencing tools. We've all seen that, how Zoom has had a phenomenal growth by growing 458% between January to August 2020. Further, enterprises are, looking to develop talent practices focusing on, remote recruitment, remote onboarding of sources, remote learning and development methodologies, and remote roll off for employees if they happen to go on. So more or less, we see these are the essential tentacles of the new workplace model, where you want to foster the right culture in the organization, have the right talent practices, and have the right technology ecosystem. Abhishek, why don't you, do a further deep dive and give our perspective on the remote working model? Abhishek, you're on mute.
I'm sorry. So what I was saying is, and to repeat myself, what's really happening is that when organizations are trying to now peer benchmark themselves or try and approach it in a manner that allows them to stay on track with regards to what the journey that they see other organizations or the industries in that they operate in work on, they are looking at two aspects here. I mean, if you look at these two aspects, like what the current remote workplace model and where they want to really pivot to, which is the workplace model of the future, there are various aspects which are part of these two buckets or part of these two themes that they are looking at and comparing and contrasting with these two. They are benchmarking on, okay, in this maturity journey, where am I? So like in the current workplace model or a remote workplace model, organizations were location bound, were thinking about how to wriggle out of rigid workplaces, focus on BU, BCP, so on and so forth. What it is really pivoting towards is this whole concept of fluid, flexible workplace with a focus on growth rather than just on business continuity, focus on employees rather than just on the enterprises, focus on institutionalized adoption or minimal risk instead of just need-based adoption or high risk percent. And obviously embedded security rather than a reaction contingency based approach towards security. And that is what is leading to a more sustainable model of remote work, which has tenets of grow from home, engage from home, and function from home. And that is why if we move to the next slide, there are very many tenets or aspects on which enterprises are now trying to double down. Now, this is where we get into the weeds or the business end of how remote workplace can get designed. And think of these 6 elements or 6 broad buckets that we are showcasing here as key elements of how any enterprises, even you, as you think about your own workplace strategies, can think about it. So whether it comes from the perspective of workplace enablement, from a talent, culture, digital adoption perspective, or if you are pivoting more towards an experience assurance, thinking about connected workplace, prescriptive analytics, assisted meetings, so on and so forth, which pivots you towards becoming a more experience-oriented organization. And then aspects which are now table stakes, I would say productivity and security, which make you pivot more towards aspects of knowledge management, creating a gig platform which allows you a much bigger, comprehensive, wider access to employee pool, and security, which is kind of the basic fundamental need that you need to fix in order to avert or mitigate for financial innovation and operational risk. and while at the same time continue doing what you were doing, which is employee assistance and operations. Now the question becomes, while these approaches will continue to get adopted, how will different industries approach these very same elements from their own context? And that is why, Abhijit, if you could take us through some of those aspects of what is going to be really important, or the building blocks of industry specific thinking, so that we can then dive into how the future of workplace will look like.
Sure. Thank you. So again, I think one essential theme which we picked up from this particular discussion is that it's not about just functioning from home anymore. It's also about from growing yourself professionally and sustaining in this new normal, which is working from anywhere. So if I take an industry lens and try to, look into the various elements where I would want of how the workplace model would evolve, at the bottom layer is what we call the standardization layer. Typically here we're looking to standardize and platformize things and try to bring in automation, build in innovation. We want workplace services to very well be close and adjacent to areas like cloud services, where it works very closely with, and security services, network services. And it'll help us to bring element like device as a service, which allow enterprises to take a scalable, modular, and cost-effective approach to the market. Coming on, the next layer is the industry context layer, where typically we'll be mapping to the industry persona, or we'll try to have the workplace services model as per the industry individual. Let's say you're a sales representative, or an research representative, or you are a healthcare worker. Your needs for devices and data would be different. Let me take an example and talk that for someone who's for a sales rep who's at a client side, for him his device should not hang, and it should not broke down easily, or should be his particular workplace services requirement, compared to, let's say, someone who's doing R&D. For him, high compute would be a typical element for him to perform his day-to-day activities. Similarly, when I come to the experience layer, or the topmost layer, which talks about user journeys, which talks about having being able to configure my workplace services as per my own individual requirement. Both me and Abhishek are analysts, but we have different sort of devices we want. We have our own preferences, and our devices function differently. So validating them, tracking them, and being able to provide the right support as per our needs is essential in a verticalized, contextualized manner for workplace services. Abhishek, I'll pass the baton to you, and try to take this particular framework we developed and try to go over the pharma industry, how the pharma industry is trying to adopt to the verticalized digital workplace services market.
Absolutely. So moving on to the next slide. So thank you, Abhijit, for taking us through some of the building blocks of what really most industries are thinking of when they consider their workplace strategy. But I wanted to bring the story home by bringing into context what a specific industry, which is pharma, specifically life sciences, how they are thinking about it. Now, we have to understand the context within which any industry operates, or any organization operates in. And we have been emphasizing that more than once, through the course of this webinar, is that depending on the business imperatives that you are currently operating under, your workplace strategy or a digital workplace strategy kind of ends up aligning to it. So let's look at pharma, what's really happening there. Now, at a broader level, M&A and divestitures are happening, cost pressures are there, employee experience as a pan-enterprise mandate is being considered. And there are some very industry-specific elements, such as, hey, how to run clinical trials in an environment wherein site visits are constrained. Should we use virtual clinical trial models, or the decentralized clinical trial models, which have become the norm these days? Or should we think about that as only an interim or an ad hoc model and pivot to the regular model when the new normal hits. But at the end of the day, all these thought processes, which is the question of what might happen in the future versus what you are currently dealing with, is forcing even pharma organizations to put out or think, put up their thinking hat and put together strategies around standardization, or think about legacy modernization, persona-based services for experience, and modernized data access, and create a distributed model. And all of these aspects are lending themselves towards how they have started to think about, say, for example, what you see on the bottom of this slide, in terms of how they are thinking about their sales and marketing, how their sales and sales representatives are working from their persona perspective, what kind of workplace requirements need to be met, and what kind of design elements, such as omni-channel support models, that they need to enable. From a lab and R&D perspective, what's really happening? So like stronger internal and external collaboration that is required, given that there is a lot of data exchange happening between different pharma firms on clinical trials, specifically around vaccine development for COVID, and how those open networks for seamless collaboration will help enable this. And last but not the least, this whole aspect of ensuring that the manufacturing and supply chain is not only keeping up to the demand, but also scaling up fast enough is the requirement that they are trying to meet. And hence, it will eventually lead to multiple different standards of how they will end up defining how to scale up manufacturing, how to enable their workforce in those environments, and being really global organizations, which pharma companies are. And I think I can only think of banking firms as being kind of having an analogy with pharma firms in this sense, that they operate across the globe under same brands also. This need for creating global standardized workplace strategy is going to be one of the most important aspects that they will continue to focus on. And hence, while they think of workplace as one bucket of the strategy, the other aspect will continue to be how they will think of the workforce. And if we move to the next slide, looking at the next slide, please. Yeah, looking at the models in terms of what kind of skills they need, or what kind of people that they need to hire even for future. This is at the broad level what we are seeing as aspects of how enterprises have been thinking about it and how they will pivot. So like from a technical perspective or technical skill perspective, single skill expertise or core skills and single skill expertise are very important. But what we have seen is that we have become more multi-skill in our approach. And hence, the new roles of tomorrow, as enterprises will think about it, will become more multifunctional in nature. And similar is the case for other buckets of skill needs, whether we are talking about non-technical skills, overall mandate of how they would nudge their workforce to work, skilling model, shifting from factory-based to more contextual, experiential, or even the organization structure, which was responding to contingencies, becoming ad hoc, will shift more towards becoming business and consumer experience aligned. And hence, if we shift to the next slide, these are some of the roles that we used to see, like yesterday's roles, like service desk agents, desktop engineers, field engineers, which have pivoted to what we see today as AI ops consultants, text-to-speech engineers, so on and so forth, that you see on this chart, will pivot to what you see on the right-hand side, which is more of a focus on connected workplace architect, data ethnographer, some of these roles which we have started to see the green shoots of, which will end up becoming the norm as we move forward in our journey towards creating both an organizational structure that delivers productivity, that emphasizes and puts on a pedestal the importance of user experience being as important as customer experience, and also at the same time ensures that the behavioral health aspect of its employees, their motivation and their ability to be productive in any environment that they operate from. Going back to my earlier comment around working from anywhere, are going to be the two important heads under which organizations will continue to operate. So I will call this a wrap. I know we are around 13 minutes to the close of the hour, but these were the tenets that we wanted to bring to bear. So net of what we discussed today, one, we talked about state of the digital workplace services market, wherein we showed you the important tenets of the here and now, the story so far. And then we talked about if, as an organization, you are thinking about reimagining the workplace, if you are thinking about the new normal, what are some of the broader tenets that you should be thinking about? What are some of the underlying metrics that you should think about? And we wrapped it up by talking about if you just had a focus on your workforce, your people, and the skills that you really want to build, what those tenets should be. So that's all that we wanted to cover. Now we can take up some of the questions that have come our way. All right, so I'm taking a look at some of the questions that have come up. So the first one, and Abhijit, I'll read out the questions. I'll try to answer partly, and I'll seek your help also to provide some context on this.
Sure.
So this is a question which says, the surge in demand for hybrid work models, work from anywhere, will this also see an increase in the investment to cater to their employees working remotely? Something like investments in areas like IT support, security, productivity, tools, power backup for homes, better reporting, more supervisory layer, etc. Interesting question, because we have seen that happen in many organizations as such, who have clearly defined remote work as a strategy that will continue to be part of their workforce model going forward for the next 5 years, 6 years, and not something that they consider as ad hoc. Such organizations who believe that a distributed work from anywhere model is their model going forward have already started investing in a lot of these tenets. So whether it's in aspects like VDI, new devices which are more secure, allow for protection of data, like you have USB ports disabled, video access prevented, all of those tenets which allow organizations to ensure the same kind of protocols, if not at the same level of rigidity within closed environments in offices, but to an extent as close as possible. They are been investing in that. Not only from this is one aspect from the perspective of the infrastructure. Even from an enablement perspective, we have seen a lot of organizations spare budgets or invest in setting up of home offices. Because one of the things most organizations have been concerned about is when they think of work from home, they think of home as an informal environment from where their employees will be working. And that raises a question or a concern in their mind, whether they will be as dedicated, as clued into what's really happening in their workplace, and not get distracted by all that happens within a home environment. And that is why this whole home office concept, wherein organizations are investing in helping set up a home office environment, wherein you have all the setup, all the infrastructure, a closed room structure, wherein if you walk into that room within your house, and a lot of us ourselves are doing it, irrespective of the nudge from our employers, allow us to be in a quasi office environment, even within the confines of our home. So that's one thing. Second thing is, with some of these distributed remote work models, such as, say, for example, WeWork or other Regus, etc., that organizations were using anyway, these are becoming more pay for use if you have been tapping into some of the ways in which they have been trying to evolve. So now, say, for example, if you needed to have a temporary collaboration environment wherein 5 or 6 people could come together and whiteboard and work together on a project, and the organization doesn't really want you to do it over a Teams or a Zoom session, you could go to a common location, which is rent it out for 5 hours, 6 hours, few days, rather than paying rent for a month or sign a lease for 6 months. So there is growing flexibility around it. there is availability of supply around a distributed model, and hence to your question that had come on this topic, there is more and more investment happening in this regard. So I don't know, Abhijit, if you have any additional comments to add to it.
Sure. I think I'll just point on one area which is of highest demands to organization in terms of, right now what we are seeing is proliferation of endpoint or devices getting ingested in the organization security perimeter. Earlier, it was just about securing your office perimeter from a security perspective, but right now it's more about securing the users' laptop, routers, and switches. So investment from a security perspective is on a higher curve as compared to other support services, and from the pointers which are pointed out in this particular question.
Okay, thank you. There is this another question which has come around the aspect of geo-specific nudge towards a distributed model. So are you seeing certain geographies adopting the work from home model more aggressively than others? And I think that's a very good question. And we touched upon that a bit when Vijay, you were talking about the different geos and how North America happens to be kind of spending lion's share on workplace investments. It's when we come to this whole work from anywhere model, a lot of that also has to do with the cultural aspect of remote work or work from home. And what I mean by the cultural aspect is that even before the crisis, which geos already had a well-structured, well-defined work from home model? So I know of certain industries or certain geos wherein work from home was pretty much a norm. So people could take 2 or 3 days in a week and work from home. And in certain cases, they were allowed that flexibility. In certain organizations, we have seen that it was almost a fait accompli, that you had to work a couple of days from home. What we saw is that for such organizations who transitioned or who were already operating in this kind of a flexible model, when COVID hit, their ability to transition to this kind of a model became almost seamless. So it was like, hey, you were already working for 2 days in a week from home, and now you just have to extend it to all days of the week. For them, the transition was easier. But if we look at certain geos or certain industries for whom coming to the office was the norm, the standardized, there were desktops out of which they used to operate from in offices. There were no laptop or a flexible delivery model. It became a bit of a challenge for them to transition. But if we just for a moment focus on the global workplace industry, credit to this industry, the supply side, the global business service organizations, and I have worked with both service providers and global in-house centers of organizations of banking, financial services, life sciences, manufacturing organizations, and have seen flavors of both organizations who were kind of ahead of the curve in adopting work from home versus the ones who were largely centralized work from office kind of models. Within a period of 4 to 5 months, and it was astonishing for me to notice how most of the organizations were able to pivot to a work from home model that allowed themselves a greater degree of business continuity, while at the same time allowing for their workforce to have greater flexibility. Hence, while these nuances exist and still operate, and in fact, the current debate around, hey, should we bringing people back to office is again very much driven by that same old context-driven approach, as in the environment in which these organizations operate, and also how they were operating the pre-crisis. So that has also become one of the important aspects. I don't know, Abhijit, if you have any other anecdotes or color to share on this aspect.
Not for this one, Abhishek.
Okay. There is this question, interesting question, which is around employee recruitment or new employees and induction in job. So the question is, don't you think it is going to be a challenge for companies in the coming years if they don't invest in workplace? Well, yes. See, what we are starting to witness already, if all of you have been keeping a track in terms of which are the industries which have been attracting most of the workforce, especially looking at the US market, we have seen that high-tech organizations like the Googles, the Facebooks of the world have gone about hiring hundreds and thousands of people for their roles, compared to, say, for example, manufacturing organizations, especially in the pharma industry, which I work with very closely, have found issues in hiring people locally in areas where they are setting up new manufacturing operations, so on and so forth. Now, the question here is, on one hand, there is an industry which is allowing you as an employee or a future hire or a recent hire to work from where you are. So say, for example, you are located in Idaho and working for a company which is headquartered out of the Bay Area, and the company allows you to work from your home location. It becomes a very easy transition for you. You're not really required to relocate. Those costs are saved both for the company and for you. You are continuing to live in the home that you are. And if you're living with your parents, fine, you're not paying any rents. All sorts of such softer benefits accrue when you already have a stated remote work strategy. Now, versus an organization which, either by way of its culture or the constraint in which it operates in. And I want to call out very specifically, because for manufacturing organizations, it may not be possible for them to allow people to work from home. The smart manufacturing, digital twinning operations have not become so mature that an automobile manufacturer can have shop technicians work remotely. In such situations, you will be required to walk into offices. You will be required as a future hire to move to a location close to the factories where they're operating in. And hence, yes, if the environment continues to be as constrained as it is right now in certain geos which are seeing a spike in COVID infections, the organization's ability to hire will be a lot dependent on how flexible they are with their hiring process, their workplace strategies, how they're allowing employees to work from anywhere, so on and so forth. But then again, we see this as a moving curve up and down, and that's how it's going to operate in the near future, and you have to be driven by context. So quickly, I know we are at close to the top of the hour, just a minute to go. I just wanted to, if you could go back a slide, yes. So this is what we wanted to offer all the participants today in terms of as a takeaway from this work from home presentation or the webinar that we had. Specifically for enterprises, if you really want to get a head start on your journey on work from home, we offer you an access to our research specifically focused on this, which has elements of work portfolio, talent model, location portfolio, and how to think about designing your work from home strategy. That's going to be important. So the question that is in front of you is, if you are interested in a complementary future of work from home research, do put in your preferences here, and we'll be reaching out to you to provide you with a copy of this. And knowing your preferences, whatever your preferences you put across here, happy to have a conversation with you on that.